Nobody cheats out of nowhere. That is the first thing to understand. Because when it happens, when you find out, when the thing you were afraid of turns out to be real, the instinct is to look for the moment it started. The specific conversation, the specific night, the specific decision where everything changed. And sometimes you can find that moment, but most of the time, cheating is not a single moment. It is a slow drift, a series of small steps that happen gradually, over time, in ways that were visible if you knew what to look for. And that is what this is about. Not about making you paranoid. Not about turning you into someone who monitors their partner like a security guard. Not about assuming the worst about every woman you are with, but about giving you honest, clear, practical information about the behavioral patterns that tend to show up when something is wrong. So that if something is wrong, you are not the last person to know. Because the worst part about being cheated on is almost never the cheating itself. The worst part is the feeling afterward that the signs were there, that something felt off, that your gut was telling you something for weeks or months, and you talked yourself out of trusting it because you did not want to believe it, because believing it was too painful, because you loved the person, and love makes us want to find innocent explanations for things that do not have innocent explanations. This is not about teaching you to be suspicious of every woman. Most people are not cheating. Most relationships are not secretly falling apart. Most partners are exactly what they appear to be. But if something already feels off, if your gut is already speaking, then this will help you understand what you might actually be seeing. Here are 5 things that tend to show up when a woman is cheating. 1. Her phone becomes a secret. This is the most talked about sign. And it is talked about so much because it is consistently one of the most reliable ones. Not because having a private phone means someone is cheating. Privacy in a relationship is healthy and normal. But because the relationship a person has with their phone tends to change very noticeably when something is happening that they do not want discovered. The phone that used to sit on the table face up is now always face down. The phone that used to be left in another room without a second thought is now carried everywhere, including to the bathroom, every single time. The phone that used to have no passcode or a passcode you both knew suddenly has a new passcode that you have not been given. The screen that used to be visible when a notification came in now goes dark or gets turned away before you can see anything. None of these things on their own are proof of anything, but when they represent a change, when the phone behavior is genuinely different from how it was before, that change is worth noticing, because people who are not hiding anything do not suddenly start hiding their phones. The phone behavior shifts because the phone now contains something that cannot be seen. What makes this sign more significant is when it comes with a strong reaction to any mention of it. If you casually notice out loud that she seems more protective of her phone lately and the response is completely disproportionate, defensive, angry, accusatory of you for even noticing, that reaction itself is information. People who have nothing to hide do not tend to react to innocent observations as if they were serious accusations. 2. Her schedule suddenly has gaps that do not make sense. Time is one of the most honest things in the world, because time has to go somewhere. Every hour of every day is being spent on something. And when a person starts spending significant time somewhere new, something in their existing schedule has to shift to make room for it. When a woman starts cheating, her time management changes, not always dramatically, not always in obvious ways, but consistently in ways that create gaps and inconsistencies that were not there before. She is working late more often than she used to, but the work does not seem to be producing more results. She is going out with friends more regularly, but the stories about those outings are vague and light on specific details. She has a new activity or commitment that takes up time, but that she does not seem particularly enthusiastic about explaining. The key thing to pay attention to is not just the gaps themselves, but the quality of the explanations for the gaps. When someone is telling the truth about where they have been, the details tend to come naturally, casually, without effort, because they are just recounting something that actually happened. When someone is covering something up, The details tend to feel slightly rehearsed, or slightly thin, or they change slightly between one telling and another, because maintaining a fabricated story requires effort, and effort produces inconsistencies over time. If her schedule has genuinely changed and the explanations for that change feel slightly off to you, pay attention to that feeling. Your brain is often processing inconsistencies faster than your conscious mind can name them. The discomfort you feel about an explanation that sounds fine but does not quite sit right is often your brain telling you that something does not add up. 3. The emotional connection changes. This one is subtler than the phone or the schedule, but in some ways it is the most significant, because physical cheating almost always begins with emotional distance. And emotional distance shows up in the relationship before anything else does. She becomes harder to reach emotionally. Conversations that used to flow easily start to feel like work. She is physically present but mentally somewhere else. The small moments of warmth and connection that used to happen naturally start to feel less frequent, less spontaneous, less real, like she is going through the motions of the relationship rather than actually being in it. At the same time, she may become more critical, more irritable, more easily frustrated by things that did not used to bother her. This happens for a specific reason. When someone is getting emotional needs met outside the relationship itself starts to feel like an obligation rather than a choice. And obligations are frustrating in a way that genuine choices are not. The irritability is often not really about you. It is about the internal conflict of being in a situation she has not yet figured out how to resolve. She may also pull back physically, not always, but often, because physical intimacy in a relationship carries emotional weight. And when someone is emotionally invested elsewhere, being physically intimate with their partner can feel complicated in ways that produce distance rather than closeness. When the emotional temperature of a relationship drops noticeably without any clear reason, when the warmth that used to be easy starts to feel like it has to be worked for, that shift is worth taking seriously, because healthy relationships do go through quieter seasons. But those quieter seasons tend to have understandable reasons behind them: stress, tiredness, difficult life circumstances, when the distance has no clear reason, or when the reason given does not quite match the degree of distance. Pay attention, for she becomes overly defensive without reason. Guilt does something very specific to the way people behave in relationships. It makes them defensive, not just when the topic of cheating comes up, but in general, about small things that should not warrant a strong reaction, about normal questions that should not feel like interrogations, about ordinary observations that should not land like accusations. When a woman is cheating, she is carrying guilt even when nothing about the conversation should be triggering it. And guilt is uncomfortable. The mind wants to escape discomfort, and one of the ways it escapes is by going on the offensive, by turning ordinary interactions into conflicts, by interpreting neutral questions as suspicious ones, by reacting to casual observations as if they were attacks. You ask a simple question about her evening and she reacts as if you have accused her of something. You make an innocent comment about her phone and she becomes immediately angry. You mention that you noticed she seemed distracted lately, and instead of a conversation you get defensiveness and then a counter-accusation about your behavior. This pattern, where normal relationship interactions consistently produce disproportionate defensive reactions, is one of the clearest behavioral signs that something is wrong, because people who are not hiding anything do not need to defend themselves against questions that were not even accusations. The defense reveals the guilt, even when the words themselves are trying to hide it. 5. Her stories stop adding up. Lies are hard to maintain, not the first lie. The first lie is often told smoothly, convincingly, in the moment, with enough detail to sound real. The problem is everything that comes after the first lie, because every lie requires supporting lies, and every supporting lie requires more supporting lies. And over time, the structure of fabrication becomes complex enough that maintaining perfect consistency becomes almost impossible. Small details change between one telling and another. The timeline of an evening shifts slightly when it comes up in a later conversation. A name that was mentioned once does not appear again when it logically should. A story that sounded complete the first time has an unexplained gap when you think about it more carefully later. An explanation that made sense in the moment does not quite hold together when you quietly run through it again afterward. Most people do not catch these inconsistencies immediately, because in the moment you are listening to someone you trust. You are not running a fact-checking operation in your head. You are just listening, but something registers. Something feels slightly off even if you cannot name it in the moment. And later, sometimes hours or days later, you find yourself thinking about that conversation again, trying to figure out why it did not sit quite right. When you start to notice that her stories have these small but consistent gaps, these slight inconsistencies that do not resolve when you think about them, that is worth paying attention to, not worth confronting aggressively on the basis of alone, but worth filing away as part of a larger picture. Because one inconsistency might be a simple mistake or a misremembering, but a pattern of inconsistencies is almost always something more. What to do with all of this? If you are reading these signs and recognizing them, the first thing to do is slow down. Do not react immediately. Do not confront angrily based on suspicion alone, because confronting without clear evidence in an angry state almost never produces the honest conversation you actually need. Produces denial, defensiveness, counter-accusation, and you end up further from the truth than you were before. Take time to observe clearly, calmly, without tipping your hand. Look for the pattern rather than just the individual signs, because one sign in isolation could mean many things, but multiple signs together, consistently, over time, tell a much clearer story. And then, when you have enough clarity, have the conversation, not as an accusation, but as an honest expression of what you have noticed and what you need to understand. Because you deserve honesty. You deserve clarity. You deserve to know the truth about the relationship you are in so that you can make real informed decisions about your own life. No sign on this list is proof of cheating on its own. And this list is not a tool for paranoia. It is a tool for awareness, for trusting your gut when it speaks, for giving yourself permission to pay attention to things that feel off rather than talking yourself out of what you are sensing. Your instincts are often smarter than your comfort. Trust them enough to look clearly, and then have the courage to act on what you find. I run on subscribers, not batteries. If this gave you something real, that button costs you nothing and it means everything.